Bernie Sanders stands at the podium, his voice cutting through the thick air of a charged rally. The crowd is restless, waiting for the words that will ignite a storm. Bernie doesn't waste time. "Let me be clear," he begins, his voice a battle cry that reverberates across the thousands in attendance. "Joe Manchin is holding America hostage." A sharp intake of breath ripples through the crowd. Cameras flash. The words are out there now, and they hang heavy in the air. Millions of working Americans are counting on this infrastructure bill. Roads are crumbling. Bridges are collapsing. Our future is being threatened by climate change. Yet one man, Joe Manchin, has decided he knows better than all of us. He's blocking progress. He's playing politics with people's lives. The crowd erupts, a mix of anger and disbelief. Bernie's finger jabs in the air, relentless, pointing directly at an invisible villain. His gaze sharpens, cutting through the audience as he continues. "For months, we've watched him negotiate, delay, and stall. He claims to care about West Virginia, but he's protecting the very interests that are ruining it, the fossil fuel companies that pollute our communities, drain our resources, and steal our future." There's a moment of silence before a roar of approval echoes back at him. Bernie's fury is palpable, and with each word, he turns the heat up, moving closer to the heart of the matter. "We are fighting for the future of every American, not just the wealthy elites. The corporations that have been lining Manchin's pockets. While the rest of us drown in inequality, climate disaster, and crumbling infrastructure, he stands as their pawn, blocking real change." The tension is now explosive, and the weight of Bernie's words lingers in the air like smoke after a fire. The crowd stands on the edge, waiting for the next line. The time for corporate sellouts is over. It's time for us to rise. With that, the rally explodes. The energy is electric. The future is on the line. Bernie Sanders has made his stand. But what happens next, the battle that's about to unfold, will shake the very foundation of this nation. The camera pans out from the rally, pulling back to reveal the vastness of the nation. Across America, the signs of decay are visible: potholes swallowing cars in cities, crumbling bridges swaying in the wind, factories spewing toxic fumes into the air, and wildfires raging through the once pristine landscapes. The infrastructure that has long supported the American dream is in ruins, and the world is watching. This isn't just a debate over roads and bridges. This is the life or death of an entire nation's future. The stakes couldn't be higher. The $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill isn't just a spending package, it's a lifeline. It's an opportunity to rebuild the heart of America, to create millions of jobs, repair aging infrastructure, and finally address the existential threat of climate change. The bill's provisions are clear: funds for renewable energy projects, a transition to green technology, a rebuilding of our crumbling schools and hospitals, clean water for communities, and, above all, an effort to give America the tools it needs to fight back against the global climate crisis. But in the Senate, one man is standing in the way. Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, a state known for its coal mines and corporate ties, has become the primary roadblock. To Manchin, the infrastructure bill is too radical, too expensive, and, above all, too threatening to his corporate backers. His opposition isn't rooted in principle, it's rooted in his connections. The fossil fuel industries have him on a tight leash. His stance on climate change is a sham. While the planet burns, Manchin is more concerned with keeping coal profits flowing. Manchin's argument? The bill is too big. Too ambitious. Too much for the American taxpayer to bear. He claims to be a moderate, a defender of fiscal responsibility. But the truth is, his moderate stance conveniently aligns with the interests of the very companies that fund his campaigns, companies that are poisoning the planet and keeping the working class trapped in a cycle of poverty. The same corporations that have profited off of America's decline. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders stands as the counterforce, the champion of the people. Bernie represents those struggling to make ends meet. The single mothers trying to feed their children, the workers waiting for the next job opportunity, the farmers watching their crops wilt under droughts. Bernie is fighting not just for a bill, he's fighting for the very soul of America. His grassroots supporters are desperate. They've waited for years for a government that truly represents them, and here, finally, is a bill that could turn the tide. The poor and working class are at the breaking point. They've been promised progress, but those promises have been hollow, delayed, or ignored. The American dream is slipping through their fingers, and this bill represents the last chance to get it back. For Bernie, this isn't just a political battle, it's personal. Every speech he gives, every debate he enters, he's thinking of the families that rely on this bill to survive. He's thinking of the future generations that will inherit this planet if we don't act now. But Joe Manchin is standing in the way. And he's not just blocking the bill, he's blocking progress. He's blocking the future. What happens next isn't just about two men. It's about the future of this country. It's about whether America will continue to be held hostage by corporate interests or whether the people will finally rise and take back what is rightfully theirs. The battle for the infrastructure bill is the battle for America's future. And every American, from the rural towns of West Virginia to the bustling streets of New York City, has a stake in this fight. But what will the American people do when faced with the stark reality of a nation divided? What will they do when their future is on the line? This isn't just politics. This is war. Joe Manchin's rise to power didn't come from a desire to help the people of West Virginia, it came from an understanding of how to manipulate power and capitalize on the broken system. Born into the heart of coal country, Manchin grew up in the small town of Farmington, where the coal mines were the lifeblood of the economy. But while the miners risked their lives every day, working themselves into early graves for pennies, Manchin saw opportunity. He understood how to play the game, and he played it well. His first major move was taking control of the family business, a coal brokerage that gave him the access and capital to forge powerful connections. He didn't stop at just being a businessman, he set his sights on politics. In the early 80s, he ran for the West Virginia House of Delegates and quickly became known as a master dealmaker, building a network of political allies and corporate backers that would keep him in power for decades. By the time he became governor in 2005, Manchin had already established himself as the go-to guy for anyone who wanted to tap into the state's resources. In the Senate, Manchin wasn't just another politician, he was the swing vote. He became the linchpin in an otherwise divided Congress, and his votes were worth their weight in gold. With his deep ties to the coal industry and his reputation as a moderate, Manchin positioned himself as the key player in Washington, a man who could be trusted to deliver votes for corporate interests while maintaining the facade of a centrist champion of the people. But the reality was far different. Manchin was a man of contradictions. He built his career by pushing policies that benefited the wealthy elites while publicly claiming to be the protector of the working class. His narrative was simple. He positioned himself as the voice of reason, standing between the extremes of the political spectrum. But behind closed doors, he was just another cog in the machine, a machine fueled by corporate money, fossil fuels, and the interests of the wealthy. Manchin's ties to the coal industry are no secret. For years, he has received generous contributions from coal companies, oil giants, and other corporations that profit off the destruction of the environment. His personal wealth grew alongside his political career, and the more influence he gained, the more his actions seemed to align with the interests of those funding his campaigns. While his constituents in West Virginia, many of whom worked in coal mines or lived in communities ravaged by environmental destruction, struggled to make ends meet, Manchin's bank account swelled. He became known for his high-dollar fundraisers, cozy dinners with lobbyists, and secret deals that benefited his corporate backers at the expense of his own people. It wasn't long before Manchin earned the label of corporate Democrat, a title he wore with surprising pride. He became the face of resistance to any progressive agenda, particularly the efforts to address climate change. While the rest of the world was moving toward renewable energy and green technologies, Manchin continued to champion coal, the industry that was slowly choking his state and the planet. But the money kept flowing, and the fossil fuel industry kept their best man in office. Manchin's inconsistency on key issues is staggering. He claims to care about the people of West Virginia, yet his actions repeatedly contradict that narrative. In 2010, he ran an ad in which he shot a cap-and-trade bill with a rifle, signaling his opposition to climate policies. In 2021, he stood in the Senate and called the $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill too costly, too extreme, and too much for the American people to bear. But when the bill came with billions of dollars in tax cuts for corporations and special interests, including, notably, fossil fuel companies, Manchin was suddenly silent. His arrogance is unmatched. He speaks in the Senate as though he is untouchable, a man above the law, a kingmaker who holds the fate of millions in his hands. He's never had to answer for his contradictions, for the backroom deals he's made or the corporate interests he's protected. To Manchin, it's all part of the game that has kept him in power, the game that has allowed him to continue to live a life of luxury while his constituents suffer. But what makes him particularly dangerous isn't just his greed, it's his ability to sell that greed to the public as common-sense politics. He tells his voters that he's fighting for them, that he's the one standing between Washington and a radical agenda that would destroy their way of life. In reality, he's standing between the American people and the future they deserve, the future Bernie Sanders is fighting for. Joe Manchin may claim to be the voice of moderation, but in truth, he is the embodiment of corporate-backed obstructionism. He is the villain in this story, the one who has repeatedly chosen the wealthy over the people, the status quo over progress, and self-interest over the good of the nation. But the question remains, how much longer will the people of West Virginia, and the people of America, tolerate being held hostage by one man's ambition and greed? Bernie Sanders wasn't born into privilege. His childhood wasn't defined by power lunches in Washington or cozy connections with corporate elites. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1941, into a working-class family. His father, a Jewish immigrant from Poland, worked tirelessly to make ends meet. His mother, a homemaker, did the best she could to raise a family on modest means. They lived in a small, cramped apartment, far from the glitzy halls of power. Bernie's early life was one of struggle, but it was also one of love and community. He saw firsthand the hardships that working families faced, and the deep inequities that ran through the fabric of society. From a young age, Bernie understood that the system wasn't designed to help people like him or his family. It was built to serve the rich and powerful, leaving the rest to fight for scraps. He watched his parents scrape together what they could, but he never saw their sacrifices celebrated or rewarded. Instead, he saw how the system kept them in their place, perpetuating cycles of poverty and inequality. But it was his experiences in the 1960s that would spark his lifelong commitment to social justice. The civil rights movement was in full swing, and Bernie, a college student at the time, was drawn to the fight for racial equality. He marched in the streets, joined sit-ins, and became an active voice for change. It wasn't just about black rights, it was about human rights. It was about breaking down the walls of inequality that existed for all marginalized groups. For Bernie, the struggle was universal. If one group was oppressed, everyone was oppressed. After college, Bernie moved to Vermont, a state that would become the heart of his political journey. He settled in the small town of Burlington, where he quickly became involved in local politics. In 1981, he was elected mayor, and it was here that he began to build the political philosophy that would define his career. As mayor, Bernie wasn't interested in corporate deals or making a name for himself. He focused on issues that directly affected the lives of everyday people: affordable housing, public education, healthcare, and the environment. He fought for policies that lifted up the poor and working class, and he didn't shy away from standing up to powerful interests that opposed those efforts. Bernie's political rise wasn't a smooth climb, it was a constant battle against a system that was built to keep the powerful in control. Every step of the way, Bernie was the underdog. When he ran for Congress in 1990, he faced stiff opposition from both the Democratic Party and the Republican establishment. But Bernie wasn't intimidated. He ran a grassroots campaign, traveling across Vermont, meeting with people face to face, listening to their struggles, and building a movement of everyday citizens who were fed up with the political establishment. His message was simple: the system wasn't working for them, but together, they could change it. When he won, Bernie became the first independent to be elected to the House of Representatives from Vermont. He didn't just take his seat and fall in line with the establishment. He continued to challenge the status quo, fighting for universal healthcare, higher wages, and environmental protections. He opposed the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, standing firm in his belief that America should lead with diplomacy, not bombs. But it wasn't just about policies for Bernie. His political philosophy was rooted in a deep, moral commitment to fairness and justice. He saw politics not as a game, but as a means of transforming society for the better. Bernie wasn't in it for power, he was in it for the people. He didn't come to Washington to make deals with lobbyists or pad his pockets, he came to Washington to challenge the system that kept the rich in control and the poor in the gutter. When Bernie ran for president in 2016, his campaign became a revolution. It wasn't just about him, it was about the people who were tired of being ignored, who were tired of a system that catered only to the wealthy. Bernie's message resonated with millions of Americans who had been left behind by both political parties. He didn't promise quick fixes or empty rhetoric, he promised a fight for justice, a fight for dignity, a fight to make America work for everyone, not just the elites. The 2016 election may have ended in disappointment for Bernie, but it was far from the end of his journey. His campaign ignited a movement that would continue to grow, fueling the energy that would carry him into the 2020 election. By then, the stakes were even higher. The country was grappling with issues of racial injustice, climate change, and a global pandemic. Bernie's call for a political revolution had never felt more urgent. And through it all, Bernie never wavered. It's important to understand that Bernie's fight is personal. This isn't a man who's chasing political power or self-interest. Bernie has spent his entire life in the trenches, fighting for the people. He has never been bought by corporate interests or Wall Street. His politics are born from his values, his belief in justice, his faith in the potential of ordinary people to come together and change the world. Bernie isn't fighting for a bill, he's fighting for the soul of the nation. The infrastructure bill represents more than just roads and bridges. It represents a chance for America to finally get it right. To do right by the people who have been ignored for too long. To give every child a chance at a better future. To finally address the climate crisis and create good, union jobs for the people who need them the most. For Bernie, this fight isn't just about a political victory. It's about a moral victory. It's about doing what is right, even when the forces of power are stacked against him. The stakes couldn't be higher, and Bernie Sanders knows it. He spent his life fighting for this moment. And he won't back down now. The Senate chamber is a battlefield. The air is thick with tension as Bernie Sanders and Joe Manchin take their positions on the floor. The infrastructure bill is on the table, and what was once a simple debate over policy has morphed into a high-stakes war for the future of the country. Senators sit in their seats, watching with bated breath, the nation holding its own. Bernie stands, his voice steady but seething with the weight of his message. Let's be clear, he begins, locking eyes with Manchin. Joe Manchin is not protecting the people of West Virginia. He is protecting the fossil fuel industry, the same industry that has poisoned the air, the water, and the land for decades, all while lining his pockets. Manchin leans forward, his expression one of feigned calm, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. He's heard this before. But today, it's different. Bernie's words aren't just sharp, they're cutting to the core of everything Manchin stands for. The corporate donations, the backroom deals, it's all laid bare. The cameras focus on Manchin, his jaw tightening, but he maintains his composure, a veneer of cool arrogance masking the rage simmering beneath the surface. Bernie, Manchin says, his voice dripping with condescension, I respect your passion. I do. But this bill, this so-called grand solution, is nothing more than a reckless spending spree. It's too much for the American people to bear. You talk about progress, but you ignore the fact that West Virginia, my state, depends on coal, on the jobs that fuel our economy. This bill will destroy those jobs. It will decimate the very people you claim to represent. The words hit hard, but Bernie remains unshaken. He's heard it all before, the talking points, the corporate-backed arguments that sound nice but have no substance. He raises his hand, silencing Manchin's defense. "No, Joe," Bernie says, his voice growing louder, "you're not protecting jobs. You're protecting a dying industry that's been holding your people hostage for far too long. West Virginians deserve better than coal dust and pollution. They deserve clean energy, green jobs, and a future that doesn't depend on the destruction of the planet." The room is tense now. Senators glance nervously at one another. Bernie has gone on the offensive, and Manchin feels the pressure mounting. His usual smugness is beginning to crack. He clears his throat, but there's no denying it, Bernie's words have gotten under his skin. "You don't understand, Bernie," Manchin snaps, his voice rising. "I've lived in West Virginia my entire life. You come from a world of privilege, you don't know what it's like for real working people, the ones who are trying to make a living, keep their families fed. You're pushing a radical agenda that ignores the reality of rural America. You don't know the first thing about my state." Bernie's gaze hardens. "I've spent my entire career fighting for working people, Joe. And I know the first thing about West Virginia. I know that your so-called moderate approach isn't protecting the people there, it's keeping them in a system that is literally killing them. Your state is the one where people die younger than anywhere else in the country. The very industry you're defending is the one causing the cancer rates, the polluted water, the environmental destruction. And you're worried about your donors, not your people." Manchin recoils slightly, his face flushed with anger. His defense is growing more desperate now, more personal. "You're out of touch, Bernie. You think this bill is the answer. You're throwing money at a problem you don't even understand. You want to bankrupt this country with reckless spending." But Bernie's patience is wearing thin. His voice lowers, but the intensity is unmistakable. "You're right, Joe. This bill isn't just about roads and bridges. It's about something far more important. It's about saving this country from the destruction caused by people like you. People who put party politics and corporate interests above the lives of their constituents. People who think they can hide behind a moderate label while selling out the future of this nation." The room falls silent. The senators are now fully engaged in the battle, each word hanging in the air like a grenade ready to explode. Manchin's face is a mask of frustration. His usual composure is slipping, the arrogance he once wore so easily now cracking under the pressure of Bernie's unrelenting attack. Manchin tries to regroup, but his voice trembles slightly. "You can keep throwing out your accusations, Bernie, but I'm not going to back down. I'm here to protect my state. I'm here to make sure that the people who put me in office aren't left behind in your rush to destroy everything we've worked for. But it's too late. The damage is done." Bernie's words have pierced through the armor of self-righteousness that Manchin had built around himself. The tension is palpable, and Bernie, ever the strategist, presses the advantage. "This isn't about politics, Joe," Bernie says softly, but firmly. "This is about people. And right now, you're failing them. Your people." Manchin's lips tighten. He knows he's losing ground, but he refuses to give up. The insults are flying, and both sides are dug in, but it's clear, Bernie Sanders is gaining momentum. The battle has only just begun, but for Joe Manchin, the cracks are starting to show. The Senate chamber is thick with tension, a palpable energy that crackles in the air as Bernie Sanders stands poised, facing Joe Manchin. The debate has reached a fever pitch, and the world is watching. Every senator in the room feels the weight of what's happening. It's no longer just a discussion over the infrastructure bill, it's a clash between progress and stagnation, between a future built on justice and one built on greed. The stakes are immeasurable. Manchin stands at his podium, trying desperately to maintain control, his voice growing more desperate with each passing moment. But Bernie isn't done. Not by a long shot. He takes a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he prepares to strike, and when he speaks, it's as if the entire room holds its breath. Joe, you've spent the last hour lecturing us on the dangers of this bill, accusing me of trying to bankrupt America, Bernie begins, his voice calm but seething with righteous fury. But let's talk about the real costs here. The costs that you're ignoring. Manchin shifts uneasily, but Bernie's words are like a surgeon's scalpel, cutting through his facade of moderation. The room is hanging on every syllable. Joe, you've spent your entire career positioning yourself as the moderate, the common-sense Democrat, haven't you? Yet when it comes to your voting record, you've chosen corporate interests over the American people time and time again. You claim to protect the working class, but let's look at the facts. You voted against a living wage for American workers. You voted against expanding healthcare to millions. You've even voted to protect tax loopholes for billionaires. The room grows quieter. Some senators shift uncomfortably in their seats. Bernie's words are no longer just accusations, they are undeniable truths. He continues, his voice rising with intensity. Don't pretend to be the defender of West Virginia's working people when you've taken over $1 million in campaign contributions from the fossil fuel industry. You've voted to allow oil companies to continue polluting the air and water of communities across America, while claiming you're protecting jobs. Which jobs, Joe? The jobs that destroy lives. The jobs that poison children's lungs. These aren't jobs, they're shackles. And you've been the one tightening them. The silence in the room is deafening now. Manchin stands frozen, his face reddening with anger, but there's no denying it, Bernie is landing blow after blow. Let's talk about coal, Joe, Bernie continues, now fully in command of the debate. You claim that the coal industry is vital to West Virginia. But you know as well as I do that coal is dying. It's not because of the radical left, as you like to claim. It's because the market has already spoken. It's because the world is moving on, and you're holding your state back. You've watched as coal has decimated communities across your state, destroying health, polluting water sources, and killing people in the process. But you refuse to stand up and give the people of West Virginia the opportunity to transition to renewable energy. You refuse to let them move forward, because the coal companies are paying you to keep them in the past. The senators around the chamber exchange glances, some squirming as Bernie's words start to resonate. They know this is more than just politics, it's a moral reckoning. Manchin clenches his fists, but Bernie doesn't relent. You want to talk about jobs, Joe? I'll tell you what real jobs look like. Real jobs are the ones we're creating with this bill, jobs in renewable energy, jobs in infrastructure, jobs that will lift families out of poverty, give people health insurance, and make sure our country doesn't fall apart. Those are the jobs we need. And you're standing in the way. Manchin opens his mouth to respond, but Bernie holds up his hand, silencing him. No, Joe, Bernie says, cutting through the tension like a knife. You don't get to talk your way out of this one. You don't get to hide behind empty rhetoric anymore. You've made your position clear. And I'm not going to let you get away with pretending to be the moderate in this fight, when the truth is you've chosen the side of the powerful every time. Manchin shifts uncomfortably, his face showing the strain of trying to keep his composure. He knows it's coming. Bernie's built this moment carefully, and now, the mic drop is inevitable. Bernie takes a step back and surveys the room. His voice lowers, but it carries the weight of conviction. The people of America, the people of West Virginia, are watching. And they know exactly who you are, Joe. They know that you're standing in the way of a better future for them. They know that you're protecting the wealthy elites and fossil fuel billionaires, while their children are dying of pollution, while their communities are crumbling. And when they look at you, they see a man who's sold his soul for a handful of corporate donations. The tension in the room thickens. Manchin opens his mouth to speak, but nothing comes out. His composure is completely shattered. The silence that follows feels like an eternity. Bernie pauses, letting the weight of his words sink in. You want to know what's really radical, Joe? What's radical is putting party politics and corporate donations ahead of the health and safety of American families. What's radical is holding up a bill that will literally save lives and secure a future for millions of people, just so you can line the pockets of your donors. That's the real radicalism. The room is silent. It's not just the senators in the chamber, the cameras across the world are on Bernie, and the viewers at home feel it, too. There's a moment, a brief but eternal pause, where everything stops. And in that moment, Bernie has won. And then, as if on cue, the chamber erupts in applause. The senators who once sat silently, watching the confrontation unfold, now stand in unison. The room shakes with the sound of support for Bernie's bold stand. Manchin, still standing at his podium, looks around, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. But the truth is inescapable. Bernie has called him out for what he is, a man who sold out his own people for corporate interests. And the room knows it. As the applause reverberates, Manchin knows that this is not just a political loss. It's a moral defeat. The American people have seen the truth. The Senate chamber may have gone quiet, but the world outside was anything but. The moment Bernie Sanders dismantled Joe Manchin, exposing the deep hypocrisy at the heart of the opposition to the infrastructure bill, rippled across the nation like an earthquake. What started as a tense debate inside the Capitol soon exploded into a viral wildfire that consumed social media, news outlets, and even the highest echelons of celebrity. Within minutes, clips of Bernie's powerful counterattack flooded the internet. The hashtag Bernie takes down Manchin began trending worldwide. Tweets, memes, and videos of Bernie's mic drop moments spread faster than wildfire, with each repost adding fuel to the fire. The footage of Bernie, standing tall and resolute, his voice unshakable as he called out Manchin's corporate ties, became an instant symbol of political courage. This is what true leadership looks like, one tweet declared, accompanied by a still of Bernie's piercing stare. Bernie has the guts to stand up to the corporate elite. Another tweet followed, Joe Manchin is officially the worst kind of sellout. Bernie just exposed him. Thousands of people, from activists to everyday citizens, shared their support, urging others to wake up to the reality of Manchin's betrayal. Within hours, the video had millions of views. By the end of the day, it had been shared across every major platform, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. There was no escaping it. Every news outlet picked up the story, replaying Bernie's scathing critique of Manchin on loop. Political analysts, pundits, and commentators dissected the moment from every angle. They couldn't stop talking about it. The story wasn't just about a Senate debate, it was about a moral reckoning, a moment where the truth had been exposed, and it was impossible to ignore. Across the country, the ripple effect was undeniable. Celebrities who had long been outspoken on issues of social justice rallied behind Bernie. Actor Mark Ruffalo tweeted, "Bernie Sanders just made the fight for America's future crystal clear. Joe Manchin's corporate ties aren't just dangerous, they're downright criminal." Comedian and activist John Oliver took to his show that night, offering a heartfelt monologue praising Bernie for his bravery. Bernie did what no one else in Washington had the guts to do. He called out a corporate puppet, and he did it with dignity and truth. Even former Republican figures, who had been critical of Bernie's progressive agenda, now found themselves forced to admit the depth of Manchin's betrayal. Former Governor of Ohio John Kasich, a known centrist, tweeted, "Today, Bernie Sanders became the voice of what's right. Manchin is no longer just a moderate, he's the enemy of progress." The impact of Bernie's words wasn't confined to one party. It was a moment that transcended political divisions. As the shockwave spread, so did the consequences for Joe Manchin. The next morning, polling data began to trickle in. Manchin's approval ratings, once buoyed by his carefully cultivated image as a moderate centrist, began to plummet. Polls in West Virginia, the very state he had claimed to protect, showed a sharp decline in his support. In a state that had been deeply divided on issues like climate change and infrastructure, Bernie's critique had broken through. Suddenly, the American public saw Manchin for what he truly was, a man who had sold out his state's future for the sake of corporate donations. The media wasn't kind to him either. By the afternoon, the Washington Post ran a headline that was hard to ignore: Joe Manchin's corporate ties exposed as Bernie Sanders calls him out in historic Senate debate. The article chronicled the history of Manchin's opposition to progressive legislation and his ties to the fossil fuel industry, painting a portrait of a politician willing to sacrifice the American people for corporate interests. Manchin was no longer being seen as a moderate, he was being framed as an obstructionist, a man who had betrayed his country for personal gain. For Bernie, the impact was even more profound. The emotional payoff from the confrontation was instant and overwhelming. His campaign, once on the back foot, found new momentum. In the days following the Senate showdown, donations poured in from all corners of the country. Grassroots supporters, young, old, urban, and rural, rallied behind Bernie with renewed vigor. It was no longer just about the bill, it was about the message Bernie had sent: the American people deserved better. And they were ready to fight for it. Political strategists began to speculate about the larger implications of the debate. The defeat of Joe Manchin wasn't just a temporary setback for corporate-backed Democrats, it was a fundamental shift in how the American public saw their leaders. No longer would corporate donations and lobbyist influence be able to shield politicians from accountability. Bernie had made it clear, the people were watching, and they were done with being ignored. The tide was turning. People across the country were rallying behind Bernie's vision of a future built on justice, dignity, and sustainability. And with each passing day, it became clearer that the battle for the infrastructure bill was no longer just about policy, it was a battle for the soul of the nation. Bernie had made it personal. And in doing so, he had ignited a revolution. The ripple effect didn't stop with Manchin's plummeting poll numbers or the growing calls for his resignation. It was the start of something bigger. Bernie's moral clarity had shattered the illusion of political normalcy. And now, the American public was awake. What would happen next? Would Manchin be forced to capitulate? Would his corporate backers finally abandon him in the face of public outcry? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the nation braced itself for the next chapter in this epic battle. The Senate chamber is quiet now, the echoes of the previous debate still hanging in the air. But there is no mistaking the shift that has occurred. The struggle for the infrastructure bill, once a battle of wills over policy, has now transformed into a defining moment in the nation's history. The pressure, the conflict, the stakes have never been clearer. Bernie Sanders stands at the podium once again. His voice, though not booming like before, carries with the weight of an entire movement. The eyes of the nation are on him, and he knows it. The truth has been laid bare. But now, with the world watching, he speaks not only for himself, but for the countless Americans who are counting on change. We've had our differences, we've fought hard, but today, Bernie begins, his voice steady, we've reached a crossroads. The battle we've waged here is not just about roads, bridges, or even climate change. It's about the future of this country. It's about whether we will remain a nation where corporate interests dictate the rules, or if we will once again be a country that stands for fairness, dignity, and justice. He pauses, letting the words sink in. The room is still, as if every senator, every staffer, is leaning in to hear what comes next. For too long, we've let the powerful few control our destiny. For too long, we've allowed them to turn our government into a tool for the rich, the corporations, and the elite. And in doing so, we've forgotten what this country was founded on. We've forgotten that America was built on the idea that all people, regardless of their race, their wealth, or their background, should have an equal opportunity to succeed. We've forgotten the idea that every citizen deserves respect, dignity, and the opportunity to live a life of fulfillment. The room is quiet, but the tension that once hung thick in the air has now shifted. There is a palpable sense of something bigger unfolding. This isn't just a policy debate, this is a moral reckoning. Bernie's words are a call to arms, not for division, but for unity. We cannot, and we will not, allow corporate greed to hijack our democracy any longer. We cannot continue to live in a world where the richest among us get richer while working people struggle to make ends meet. We cannot continue to ignore the devastation caused by environmental destruction, by systemic racism, and by an economy that leaves millions behind. We cannot continue to let greed, corruption, and indifference dictate the future of our children, our families, and our planet. Bernie's gaze sweeps across the room, and for a moment, he seems to be speaking directly to the American people. His tone is resolute, yet filled with a kind of quiet urgency, as though he knows the battle is far from over, but this is the moment to remind everyone of what is truly at stake. This is not a time for cynicism, he says, his voice rising now with emotion. It's a time for action. A time for us to stand together and demand that the government work for us, not for the billionaires, not for the fossil fuel giants, but for the people who built this country, the people who keep it running. The workers, the teachers, the nurses, the construction workers, the ones who make this country great. And we will not stop until we create an America where every person is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. The room is still. No one moves. The weight of Bernie's words hangs in the air. It's not just a speech, it's a moment of truth. A moral imperative. Bernie takes a breath and continues, his voice calm but unwavering. This is not just about the infrastructure bill. It's not about politics. This is about who we are as a nation. It's about whether we're willing to stand up for what's right, even when the powers that be try to push us back. It's about whether we're willing to fight for a future that includes everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful. He leans in, his eyes sharp, filled with a kind of fire that can't be ignored. It's time to take back this country. It's time to fight for what's right, to fight for justice, to fight for the American dream, for all of us. We're in this together. And if we stand united, if we fight for the values that this nation was built on, we will win. The power is in our hands, and together, we will create an America that works for every citizen. There's a long silence in the room, but this time it's different. The energy is not one of uncertainty, but of potential. Bernie's words have resonated, struck a chord that runs deeper than politics. It is a vision of America that speaks to the heart of what it means to live in a democracy, a vision of fairness, equality, and dignity for all. As Bernie finishes his speech, the chamber is still, but the world beyond it has already begun to shift. The echoes of his words are felt everywhere, in the streets, on social media, and in the hearts of those who are ready to fight for something more. Bernie's message is clear, this is just the beginning. And as the camera pulls back from the Senate floor, we know one thing for certain, the fight for the soul of America is far from over. The dust may have settled in the Senate, but the fight is far from over. Bernie Sanders has shown us all what true leadership looks like, standing up against the powerful, fighting for justice, and never backing down. His victory in exposing the hypocrisy of Joe Manchin is a moment we can all be proud of. But this isn't just about one debate or one bill. It's about a movement. A movement that will continue to grow, continue to fight for a fairer, more just America. We've seen what happens when we stand together, when we refuse to accept the status quo. We've seen the power of truth, the power of moral clarity. But this is just the beginning. The fight for progress doesn't end here. We've got work to do. We've got to make sure the infrastructure bill passes, and we've got to hold every politician accountable, from the local level to Washington, D.C. If you believe in the values that Bernie fought for today, fairness, dignity, and a future where corporate greed no longer controls the political process, now is the time to act. We need you. We need you to raise your voice, to share this video, to talk to your friends, your family, your communities. Every voice matters in this fight. Subscribe to this channel for more updates, more powerful moments, and more stories of the fight for justice. Share this video with everyone you know. Let's make sure the world knows that we stand united, for the American dream, for the people, and for a future where everyone has a fair shot. This is our time. The fight is not over. The movement is just beginning. Let's make this moment count. Together, we can create the change we want to see.